What would you do if someone who erased you from their life suddenly remembered your name right after you made headlines? My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 67 years old, and until last month I was nothing more than a retired factory foreman living in a forgotten corner of Milwaukee. My life has been reduced to a threadbare recliner, peeling wallpaper, and the ticking of an old clock that's been counting away the seconds since Elaine left this world. 16 years she's been gone. Lymphoma took her quickly, but the emptiness she left behind refuses to fade. I find meaning in small things now. Reading yesterday's newspaper. Polishing the silver frame that holds Elaine's smile. Tossing breadcrumbs to the chickadees that visit my backyard. Routine keeps me breathing when memory threatens to suffocate. Some wounds you learn to live with, like the one my daughter Melanie carved into my heart when she walked out 22 years ago. I haven't spoken her name aloud since then, not once, until the lottery ticket changed everything. It was a Saturday morning, March 9th. Just another breakfast of instant oatmeal and black coffee when I checked the numbers on that $5 ticket I'd bought at Mike's Bodega downtown. I stared at those matching digits for nearly 20 minutes before I could believe it. $14.7 million, $8.3 million after taxes. My hands trembled all the way to the Madison lottery office. When they verified it for the third time, I still couldn't process it. There was no one to call, no one to celebrate with, just me and a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. I decided to keep it quiet. What good would attention do me now? But then, Shannon Decker from Channel 6 found the public lottery records. She was persistent, young, eager, convinced that viewers would be inspired by my humble good fortune. I finally gave in, figuring I could at least thank the state of Wisconsin for the windfall. The cameras came to my living room on March 31st. I sat stiffly, answered questions carefully, kept my emotions tucked away where they belonged. When Shannon asked about family, I measured my words precisely. It's complicated. My wife passed away. I've been on my own for a long time. I never mentioned Melanie. The omission was deliberate, like bait dropped in water to see what might surface. Then it happened. 6:38 in the evening on April 1st. I was eating dinner, roast chicken, instant potatoes, silence, when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. My hands trembled as I picked up. "Hi, Daddy. It's Melanie." Time froze. My fork dropped to the plate with a clatter that echoed through the kitchen. My vision blurred around the edges as her voice, polished, musical, unnaturally warm, flowed through the receiver. I couldn't speak. Memories collided in my chest like shattered glass. "I saw you on TV," she continued, filling my silence with practiced charm. "I'm so proud of you. What amazing luck." Every pause felt calculated, every inflection precisely engineered. She told me she was living in Manhattan now, running a consulting company, successful, healthy. Just missing one thing. Even through the shock, I could sense the manipulation in her tone. 22 years of silence, and now that I had money, she suddenly remembered my number. "I'm having my 42nd birthday party next week," she said. "April 10th. I'd love for you to come, Daddy. This isn't about money. I just miss my father." I said little, mostly listened. Inside, suspicion wrestled with longing, the desperate wish that maybe, just maybe, she meant it. "I'll think about it," was all I could manage. A few minutes after we hung up, my phone chimed. She'd texted her address. 928 West 76th Street, apartment 12B, Manhattan. That night I sat awake in my recliner, Elaine's photo clutched in my weathered hands. I replayed the call in my mind, not for sentiment, but to analyze it. For the first time in 22 years, I didn't feel old. I felt alert. At midnight, I climbed into the attic and pulled down a dusty cardboard box marked Melanie College Years. Inside were photos, school awards, her graduation picture, everything from the time before she disappeared from my life. Deeper in the storage space was another box, Elaine's letters. One stood out, yellowed with age, but clear in its warning. If Melanie ever comes back, don't trust her smile. Trust your gut. I dug further and found what I was really looking for. The hospital bills, foreclosure notices, debt collectors' letters, all from the year Elaine died. The financial ruin that Melanie couldn't bear to face. The real reason she walked away and never looked back. Just before dawn, I picked up my notebook and wrote the date. April 2nd. Below it, 3 words that would change everything. Plan, confirm, act. Sometimes the ghosts we miss are just people wearing new masks. I woke early the morning after Melanie's call, my mind sharper than it had been in years. The coffee pot sputtered in the kitchen as sunlight crept across the table where her address still lay, burning a hole in my thoughts. I flipped through the local paper, finding my own face smiling back from page 3. Milwaukee man wins $14.7 million, the caption read. Beneath it, a story about good fortune, humble roots, and no family left. The irony stung. That lie had been true until yesterday. By evening, I'd made my decision. I pulled out the burner phone I'd kept for emergencies and dialed Melanie's number. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice remained steady. Melanie, it's your father. Daddy, I was hoping you'd call. Have you thought about my invitation? There's been a mistake, I said flatly. I didn't actually win the lottery. The state's issuing a correction. The silence that followed told me everything. For several long seconds, nothing but dead air hummed between us. So, why are you calling me then? Her voice had transformed, no longer warm and musical, but cold, clipped, dismissive. I gripped the phone tighter. Actually, I was testing you. The money's real. The change was immediate, like flipping a switch. You're such a jokester, Dad. You really scared me for a minute. Her laugh tinkled through the receiver. Practiced, perfect, hollow. I didn't laugh back. I had my confirmation. After hanging up, I sat in my recliner, staring at the ceiling. She's not here for me, I whispered to the empty room. She's here for the money. But instead of breaking me, the realization hardened something inside. A thought took shape. She taught me to survive in silence. Now she'll learn what happens when I speak. I spent the evening rereading Elaine's old letters. Several cautioned against Melanie's charm, her way of making you feel special right before she took what she needed. One letter ended with words that now felt prophetic. Protect what you love, even from your own blood. The next day, Melanie's texts began flooding my phone. Can't wait to hug you again. We've both changed, haven't we? Photos of her Manhattan apartment followed. Sleek furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, champagne chilling in a silver bucket. Several business contacts will be at my party, she wrote. You can network if you want to invest in something meaningful. She casually name-dropped a venture capital group, mentioned she was restarting her consulting firm. It was all wrapped in silk, but I could see the claws underneath. On April 3rd, I booted up my old PC and typed Melanie Bennett and Bridgepoint Advisors into the search bar. The first page of results showed exactly what she wanted the world to see. Polished LinkedIn profiles, a Forbes quote, professional PR photos of her shaking hands with men in expensive suits. But by page 3, cracks began to appear. Articles about Bridgepoint shutting down without investor refunds, complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau. I dug deeper, discovering aliases Melanie had used. Melanie Carter, Melanie Bay, M.L. Carter. Each name linked to failed ventures, legal issues, dissolved LLCs. My dining room table soon became covered with printouts. I built a timeline on paper. Solar Nova Systems, registered January 2019, dissolved December 2020. Supposedly focused on residential solar installations across Connecticut. Raised $580,000 from 11 private investors. No installations were ever completed. The bank account was drained. Harvest Glow Markets, operated from 2021 to 2022, an online organic produce delivery startup based in Brooklyn. Raised $310,000 through an angel investment round. Investors reported bounce checks and dead email addresses. Bridgepoint Advisors, her latest venture, launched in 2023. A small business consulting incubator, she claimed, helped women-owned startups. $420,000 in capital disappeared. Melanie's LinkedIn profile was removed shortly after. I felt sick. This wasn't just about me. She'd hurt dozens of people. I started tracking down the names of her investors through forums, lawsuits, archived web pages, and recordings of Zoom webinars she'd spoken at. 3 names appeared repeatedly. Andrew Clark, a venture capitalist from San Diego who invested in Solar Nova. Catherine Monroe, a corporate attorney from Chicago, investor in Harvest Glow. Marcus Dean, a Denver-based entrepreneur who trusted Melanie with funds for a joint consulting expansion via Bridgepoint. Each had posted online about their betrayal and financial devastation. Their stories read like wounds, still bleeding. I created detailed profiles for each victim. Andrew Clark, former real estate broker turned investor, lost $190,000. His LinkedIn post said, "I believed in Melanie's pitch. I thought she was revolutionizing the solar sector. Turns out, she just evaporated." Catherine Monroe, a legal compliance advisor for financial firms, lost $160,000, personal funds from an inheritance. She had an ongoing lawsuit against Harvest Glow Markets, LLC. In a forum post, she wrote, "It wasn't just money. She insulted my intelligence." Marcus Dean hit me hardest. A family man who ran a small business in Colorado Springs, he lost $230,000, money meant to expand into a second location. His daughter had to drop out of college because of the financial hit. "Melanie took our dreams and used them to buy herself a penthouse view," he wrote in an online comment. By April 6th, I was ready. I drafted identical letters to each victim. Subject: regarding Melanie Bay Carter, Bridgepoint and related fraud. I didn't reveal my identity, but I gave them the exact party date, time, and location. April 10th, 8:00 p.m., 928 West 76th Street, Apartment 12B, Manhattan. I attached PDFs with evidence, business documents, and screenshots. Using a burner email account, silentwatcher.mke@protonmail.com, I sent all 3 messages by 2:00 that afternoon. By 4:00, I had read receipts on all 3. By 7:00, replies from both Andrew and Catherine. Andrew: "I'll be there. With paperwork." Catherine: "I've been praying for this opportunity." Marcus's response came at midnight. "See you there. Time to look her in the eye." I sat back in my recliner and whispered to the darkness. "You wanted me back in your life, Melanie. Now I am. Just not in the role you imagined." I spent the rest of the night preparing a folder labeled Plan B in case something went wrong. Inside, contact information for a Manhattan private investigator, a USB drive with voice recordings of our conversations, and a notarized letter detailing her scams. Just as I was shutting down my laptop, an unexpected message hit my inbox. A private message from someone anonymous. "She's done this before. Not just to investors. You need to be careful." I stared at those words until sunrise, wondering who else my daughter had hurt, and what other secrets were waiting to be uncovered. She thought I was the easiest mark she'd ever return to. She forgot who raised her. On the morning of April 5th, I sat at my kitchen table with 3 things in front of me. My daughter's birthday invitation, a faded photo of Melanie's college graduation, and my old factory logbook from my shift supervisor days. The logbook was worn at the edges, filled with 20 years of meticulous notes. Late workers, safety violations, production targets, equipment failures. I flipped to a blank page and began recording everything I'd learned about Melanie. Her aliases, business registration dates, company closures, investor complaints. Just as I'd once documented factory incidents, I now cataloged my daughter's deceptions with the same methodical precision. She thinks I'm the same man who begged her not to walk out, I muttered to myself. She doesn't know I've had 22 years to become someone she'd never recognize. I continued building my fraud timeline, expanding the details with every new discovery. Solar Nova Systems had promised revolutionary residential solar technology that would cut energy costs by 70%. 11 investors handed over their money, only to discover 6 months later that no patents had been filed, no prototypes existed, and Melanie's corporate office was nothing but a virtual mailbox service. Harvest Glow Markets had been even more insidious. Melanie had marketed it as a farm-to-table revolution, connecting organic farmers directly to urban consumers. She'd even created a slick presentation claiming that 10% of proceeds would support sustainable farming practices. The $310,000 she raised vanished within 18 months. The farmers were never paid. But Bridgepoint Advisors was her masterpiece. She'd positioned herself as a champion for women entrepreneurs, claiming to provide mentorship and capital to underserved female founders. Catherine's lawsuit documents revealed that Melanie had charged membership fees ranging from $5,000 to $20,000. Promising connections to angel investors who never materialized. As I scrutinized lawsuit filings, I found disturbing patterns. Melanie targeted specific types of investors: idealists passionate about social causes, recent inheritors of family wealth, and successful professionals looking to diversify their portfolios. She wasn't just stealing money, she was exploiting dreams. I spent hours creating detailed profiles of her 3 recurring victims. Andrew Clark was 58, divorced, with grown children. His investment firm specialized in environmentally sustainable businesses. I found a podcast where he'd spoken about losing his brother to skin cancer, which explained his interest in Solar Nova's promised UV filtering technology. His $190,000 investment had been withdrawn from his retirement account. Catherine Monroe was 45, a legal compliance advisor whose father had left her a substantial inheritance. She'd invested in Harvest Glow after Melanie convinced her it would revolutionize food access in underserved Chicago neighborhoods. Catherine's lawsuit contained damning evidence: bank records showing Melanie had transferred investor funds directly to accounts at Neiman Marcus and Tiffany & Co. Marcus Dean's story crushed me. At 52, he'd built a successful printing business from nothing. His investment in Bridgepoint was meant to fund expansion into a second location in Denver, potentially creating 15 new jobs. The $230,000 he lost represented nearly 20 years of savings. His daughter, Jessica, had been in her junior year at Colorado State when the family's finances collapsed. She never finished her degree. On April 6th, I drafted my letters carefully. Each contained the same essential information. I have reason to believe that Melanie Bay Carter Bennett will be hosting potential investors at her apartment on April 10th at 8:00 p.m. The address is 928 West 76th Street, apartment 12B, Manhattan. If you wish to confront her regarding past business dealings, this may be your opportunity. I attached comprehensive evidence packets tailored to each recipient, then sent them through my anonymous email account. The responses came faster than I expected. Andrew's reply was businesslike. "I'll be there, with paperwork. Police have been reluctant to pursue charges without proof of criminal intent. Perhaps seeing multiple victims together will change that." Catherine wrote, "I've been praying for this opportunity. My lawyer will be on standby. Thank you for this information, whoever you are. Marcus's midnight response was simple but resolute. See you there. Time to look her in the eye. As I sat in my old recliner that night, something shifted inside me. The hurt and betrayal that had defined my relationship with Melanie for 22 years was transforming into something else, a cold, clear purpose. You wanted me back in your life, Melanie, I whispered to the darkness. Now I am. Just not in the role you imagined. I wasn't naive enough to think my plan couldn't fail. Melanie had evaded consequences before, so I prepared a contingency folder, Plan B, with everything needed to continue pursuing her if she somehow slipped away again. I included contact information for a Manhattan private investigator I'd researched, the USB drive containing our recorded conversations, and a detailed notarized statement about her history of fraud. As I was closing my laptop for the night, a message appeared that sent a chill through me. The sender's address was encrypted, untraceable. She's done this before, not just to investors. You need to be careful. I slept fitfully, wondering what other damage my daughter had left in her wake. The next morning, April 7th, I received another anonymous message. My name is Nicole Tran. I was Melanie's assistant at Solar Nova. When I questioned the accounting irregularities, she threatened to sue me for defamation and report me to immigration services. I have documents that could help. I immediately replied, asking for details. Nicole's response came within minutes. I kept copies of altered bank statements, emails where she discussed strategic exits before investor funds were depleted, and recordings of her coaching me on what to tell potential investors. I was 24 and terrified when this happened, but I'm ready to come forward now. I asked if she would consider meeting me in New York. Her answer was resolute. Just tell me when and where. I'll be there. That afternoon, I made travel arrangements. I purchased a bus ticket to Chicago and a one-way flight from O'Hare to LaGuardia. I booked a modest hotel room near Times Square, nothing that would deplete my newfound wealth, but comfortable enough for planning my next moves. I spent the evening shopping for a few necessities, a new coat that wouldn't mark me immediately as a Midwesterner, a pair of black leather gloves, and a second-hand Samsonite suitcase. I also selected a small, sturdy box from the craft store and wrapped it like a birthday present. Inside the box, I placed 3 items: a copy of Melanie's graduation photo with her parents, a printout of the first investor lawsuit filed against her, and a blank check signed, "Love Dad," with "Void" stamped across it in bold red letters. As I packed these items carefully into my suitcase, I thought about Elaine. What would she think of what I was doing? Would she approve of my plan to expose our daughter? After a moment of reflection, I knew the answer. Elaine had valued honesty above all things. She would have been heartbroken by Melanie's choices, but she would have wanted the deception to end. That night, I watched Melanie's old TEDx talk on YouTube. Empowering Female Founders was the title. She stood on stage in a crisp white blazer, speaking passionately about breaking glass ceilings and creating opportunity ecosystems. The audience applauded enthusiastically. I felt physically ill watching her manipulate the crowd with practiced sincerity, knowing that at least 3 people had lost their life savings because they believed in her vision. 2 days later, I would be in New York, and Melanie would discover that the father she'd dismissed as a simple, easily manipulated old man had become something else entirely during our 22 years apart. She'd spent her adult life turning others into marks. I'd spent the last week turning her birthday party into a sting operation. She spent her life turning others into marks. I spent the last week turning her party into a sting operation. The morning of April 9th arrived with a pale sun stretching across my kitchen floor. I double-checked my suitcase one last time. Clothes for 2 days, toiletries, the wrapped gift box, and most importantly, my folder of evidence. I ran my fingers over the gift box, feeling the sharp corners beneath the cheerful birthday wrapping. Inside lay the graduation photo, the lawsuit printout, and the voided check, symbols of what had been, what had become, and what would never be. The bus ride to Chicago was uneventful. I watched the Wisconsin countryside roll past, fields just beginning to green with early spring. My mind kept returning to Elaine, wondering what she would say if she could see me now. I could almost hear her voice. "Do what needs doing, Harold. Then, find your peace." At O'Hare, I navigated the crowds with a determination that surprised me. For years, I'd avoided travel, content to stay within the familiar boundaries of Milwaukee. Now I moved with purpose, boarding my evening flight to New York with a clarity I hadn't felt in decades. The hotel near Times Square was a sensory assault after the quiet of my neighborhood. Lights flashing, horns blaring, crowds surging along the sidewalks. In my room on the 15th floor, I spread my materials across the bed and reviewed everything one more time. I organized my folders, tested the recording app on my burner phone, and scanned my handwritten notes for any holes in my plan. Satisfied, I turned on the television and found Melanie's TEDx talk again, studying her mannerisms, her practiced smiles, the way she used her hands to emphasize points. I was looking for weaknesses, tells, anything that might give me an advantage tomorrow. At 11:30, my phone buzzed with a message from Nicole Tran. "I've arrived in New York. Meeting you tomorrow as planned. I have everything we discussed." I replied with a simple acknowledgement, then tried to sleep. Rest came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of Elaine in her hospital bed, of Melanie walking away, of numbers spinning like lottery balls. The morning of April 10th, Melanie's birthday, dawned clear and cool. I spent the early hours methodically reviewing my plan once more, then met Nicole for coffee at a small cafe 3 blocks from my hotel. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 30s now, with a quiet intensity in her eyes. She slid a manila envelope across the table without preamble. "Everything's here," she said softly. Bank transfers, emails discussing strategic exits, voice memos where she explicitly discusses hiding assets offshore. She made me record investor calls so she could critique my pitch performance later. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" I asked. Nicole's eyes dropped to her coffee cup. "I was on a work visa. She knew that. Told me she'd claim I was complicit, that I'd be deported. I was sending money home to my parents in Vietnam. I couldn't risk it." I nodded, understanding completely. "And now? I'm a citizen now. She can't touch me." Her jaw tightened. "And I'm tired of being afraid of her." "She's going to react badly when she sees you," I warned. "I know." Nicole met my gaze steadily. "I'm counting on it." By 7 that evening, I was dressed in my new coat, the gift box tucked under my arm, making my way to Melanie's address on the Upper West Side. The building was exactly what I'd expected. Doorman, marble lobby, elevator with polished brass fixtures. "I'm here for Melanie Bennett's birthday," I told the doorman, who nodded and waved me toward the elevator without question. As the elevator climbed to the 12th floor, my heart pounded against my ribs. Doubt flickered briefly. Was I doing the right thing? Was I about to destroy whatever fragile possibility existed for reconciliation? But then I remembered the devastation in Marcus Dean's online posts about his daughter dropping out of college, and my resolve hardened again. The hallway was quiet, muffled music and voices drifting from behind Melanie's door. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and knocked. The door swung open, and there she was, my daughter, 22 years older but instantly recognizable. She wore a sleek black dress, champagne flute in hand, hair perfectly styled. For a moment, time collapsed, and I saw the little girl who used to ride on my shoulders at the county fair. Then her eyes widened, Her practiced smile bloomed, and she threw her arms around me with theatrical enthusiasm. "Daddy, you made it." The apartment was exactly what her text photos had promised. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a Manhattan view, modernist furniture, abstract art on the walls. About a dozen guests mingled, all wearing expressions of polished success and studied nonchalance. Melanie pulled me into the room, her arm linked through mine as if we'd never been apart. "Everyone," she announced, voice pitched to Carrie, "this is my father. Recently fortunate, but always generous." I smiled and nodded as she introduced me to her circle. Financial advisors, tech entrepreneurs, marketing executives, all eyeing me with the same calculated interest. I recognized the look from my research, potential investors sizing up a mark. "James is launching a revolutionary fintech platform," Melanie said, guiding me toward a man in an expensive suit. "And Alicia's green energy startup is disrupting the entire West Coast grid system." I played along, expressing appropriate interest, asking just enough questions to seem engaged, but naive. All the while, I kept one eye on the clock and one eye on the door. As I made my way to the kitchen for a glass of water, I noticed a stack of mail partially hidden beneath a serving tray. Credit card statements, past due notices. Melanie's financial facade was as thin as the veneer on her cheap kitchen cabinets. I overheard fragments of conversation from a couple near the window. "If she secures her father's backing," and "Melanie said she's got him convinced." Melanie floated through the room, orchestrating conversations that all led to the same destination: funding. I heard her tell a man in a blue blazer, "My father and I are building something, a generational opportunity." To another guest, she murmured, "He trusts me again. I think this will be the big one." I maintained my role, the gentle, slightly overwhelmed father, champagne in hand but barely sipped, nodding at investment terms I pretended not to fully understand. I checked my watch discreetly. 7:58 p.m. Almost time. I caught Melanie's eye across the room and gestured for her to join me near the entrance. "Your real present is outside," I said quietly. Her eyes lit up with childlike excitement that almost made me falter. "Dad, you shouldn't have. What is it?" I smiled, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. The kind of gift that doesn't fit in a box. Melanie turned to her guests, laughing. "Everyone, my dad has a surprise." She strode to the door with the confidence of someone who believed the universe existed to please her. Her hand reached for the doorknob. Turning it with a flourish, the door swung open, and Melanie froze. Standing in the hallway was Andrew Clark, legal satchel in hand, his face a mask of calm determination. Beside him stood Catherine Monroe, holding a folder of legal filings, her posture rigid with controlled anger. Marcus Dean was there too, slightly back from the others, watching Melanie with unwavering intensity, hands clenched at his sides. And behind them all, almost hidden in their shadow, was Nicole Tran, whose presence would be the final, devastating blow. In that frozen moment before Melanie could react, before her guests could understand what was happening, I saw 22 years of deception crystallize in my daughter's eyes. And for the first time since she'd called me after the lottery win, I felt no conflict, no doubt, no regret, just clarity. She spent the night telling everyone I was her future. I was only ever here to remind her of her past. The moment stretched like glass about to shatter. Melanie stood frozen in the doorway, her theatrical smile still fixed on her face. But her eyes, those were real now, wide with shock and growing comprehension. Behind her, the party chatter dimmed as guests sensed something was wrong. "Oh, old colleagues," Melanie recovered quickly, voice pitched just slightly too high. "What a surprise." Her attempt at casual dismissal fell flat. The guests began to murmur, unsure what was happening but intuitive enough to sense the tension crackling in the air. Catherine Monroe stepped forward first, her corporate attorney poise unmistakable. "We're not here for pleasantries, Ms. Bay," she said, her voice clipped and precise. She emphasized the alias deliberately. "You've been served." Andrew Clark was next, pulling financial records from his satchel with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd prepared meticulously for this moment. "Wire transfers to offshore accounts," he announced, laying papers on Melanie's sleek entry table. "Forged contracts, bank statements with your signature authorizing withdrawals that investors never approved." Catherine added her own documentation to the growing pile. Class action complaints, misrepresentation, wire fraud, misappropriation of investor funds. Marcus Dean remained silent, but his action spoke volumes. He quietly placed a single photograph on top of the legal papers, his daughter in a graduation gown, smiling, next to a scholarship revocation letter. Then he added Melanie's email promising him guaranteed returns. The party had gone completely silent now. In my peripheral vision, I saw one guest begin filming with his phone. Another whispered to a friend, "That's Bridgepoint, isn't it? I almost invested." A wealthy-looking couple who'd been deep in conversation with one of Melanie's business partners quietly gathered their things and slipped toward the door. Even the jazz quartet Melanie had hired stopped playing. One musician set down his instrument and simply walked out. Melanie's face had transformed entirely now, cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, anger, calculation, fear. "This is all a misunderstanding," she tried, voice shaking slightly. When no one responded, her tone hardened. "This is harassment, and it's illegal. You can't just show up at my private residence." Catherine calmly countered. "We're well within legal bounds, Ms. Bay. You've violated federal and state securities laws. You used wire transfers across state lines to commit fraud. That's a federal offense." Melanie's gaze darted around the room, seeking allies and finding none. Finally, her eyes locked on mine, desperation replacing calculation. "Daddy," she pleaded, "are you going to let them do this to me?" The room fell silent again. Every eye turned to me, the father who had appeared out of nowhere, just days after winning millions. I stepped forward, quiet but composed. I set my wrapped gift box down on the table in front of her, next to the growing stack of evidence. "I already did, Melanie," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I let you do it. To yourself." I opened the box slowly, revealing its contents: the graduation photo, the investor complaint, the voided check. Her face tightened. Tears threatened, but none fell. Her voice trembled with genuine emotion for the first time that night. "You set me up." Before I could respond, Nicole Tran spoke up from the hallway where she'd been waiting. "She threatened to have me deported if I ever spoke," Nicole said, her voice small but resolute. "I was 24 and scared, but I kept records." She held up a flash drive. Internal emails, voice memos of Melanie discussing strategic exits, records of how she hid accounts offshore. I quietly handed Nicole a business card I'd prepared, the contact information for a federal financial crimes division. Melanie's composure finally shattered. She lunged forward, trying to slam the door, but Andrew calmly wedged his foot in the opening. "You'll want to speak with your attorney, Ms. Bay," Catherine said with professional detachment. "Our legal team will contact you Monday. And by the way, so will the feds." Marcus, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally moved. He dropped one final document on the floor, a letter from his daughter to Melanie, begging for her money back so she could return to college. The envelope was unopened. Melanie collapsed to her knees, speechless, as her empire of lies crumbled around her. I turned away, unable to watch any more. I'd imagined this moment for days, expected to feel triumph or at least satisfaction. Instead, I felt hollow. This woman on her knees was still my daughter, the baby I'd once rocked to sleep, the child whose bicycle I'd taught her to ride. But she was also a stranger who had hurt countless people without remorse. As I walked toward the elevator, I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Nicole following. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For believing me. For doing something." I nodded, unsure what to say. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and I stepped inside. Just as the doors began to close, a man in a dark coat stepped out from around the corner near the stairwell. He moved with purpose, flashing a badge that caught the hallway light. "Mr. Bennett," he said, holding the elevator door open. "I'm Special Agent Thomas Reeves with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We've been watching your daughter for some time. We'd like a word." I stepped back into the hallway, feeling a strange mixture of dread and relief. "Of course." Agent Reeves gestured toward a quiet corner away from Melanie's apartment. "First, I want to be clear that you're not in any trouble. We've been building a case against Melanie Bennett, also known as Melanie Bay and Melanie Carter, for nearly 18 months. We became aware of your situation when you purchased your plane ticket to New York." "You've been monitoring me?" I asked, surprised. "Not specifically you. We flagged travel patterns connected to persons of interest. When your name appeared in her visitor logs, it raised questions. Then when we saw you'd contacted several of her former investors," he shrugged. "We connected the dots. So what happens now? Now we move forward with formal charges: wire fraud, securities fraud, tax evasion. The evidence from Mr. Clark, Ms. Monroe, and Mr. Dean will be invaluable to our case." "And Nicole?" I asked, glancing at the young woman standing nearby. "Ms. Tran's testimony about internal operations will be crucial. We'll ensure she's protected." Agent Reeves handed me his card. "We'll need a formal statement from you tomorrow, 10 a.m. at our Manhattan office, if that works for you." I nodded, suddenly feeling every one of my 67 years. "I'll be there." As the agent turned to leave, he paused. "Mr. Bennett, if you don't mind my asking, why did you do this? You could have just ignored her call, kept your lottery winnings to yourself." I considered the question carefully. "Because some debts can't be paid with money." He nodded thoughtfully. "The financial damages from her schemes exceed $2 million, but the personal harm—" He trailed off. "That's incalculable," I finished for him. "Exactly." He offered his hand, which I shook. "For what it's worth, Mr. Bennett, I think you did the right thing. It couldn't have been easy." As Agent Reeves walked back toward Melanie's apartment, where I could still hear raised voices and movement, Nicole touched my arm gently. "What will you do now?" she asked. I hadn't thought beyond this moment. For a week, my entire focus had been on this confrontation, this reckoning. Now that it was happening, I felt adrift. "Go back to my hotel," I said finally, "and then home to Milwaukee. Beyond that." I shrugged. "She hurt a lot of people," Nicole said quietly, "but you stopped her from hurting more." The elevator arrived again, and this time I stepped in alone. As the doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of the hallway. Agents entering Melanie's apartment, guests leaving hurriedly, and somewhere in the chaos, my daughter, facing consequences that had been 22 years in the making. Back in my hotel room, I sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer across the Manhattan skyline. I thought about Elaine, about what she would say if she were here. I imagined her sitting beside me, her hand in mine. "It's done," I whispered to her memory. "For better or worse, it's done." I picked up the local paper that had been delivered to my door that morning. Tomorrow, Melanie's name would likely appear in these pages, but for very different reasons than mine had. I folded it carefully and set it aside, a reminder of how quickly fortunes can change. The Melanie I'd once known The child who collected seashells and sang off-key and fell asleep reading was gone forever. Perhaps she had never really existed at all, just a mask that had slipped away to reveal the stranger beneath. As midnight approached, I made a decision. Tomorrow, after giving my statement to the SEC, I would go home, and I would begin the process of building something my lottery winnings couldn't buy. Purpose. Revenge doesn't give you peace, but it makes space for it to finally arrive. The morning after Melanie's party, I found myself sitting on a bench near Central Park, watching New Yorkers hurry past. A local paper sat in my lap, the front page dominated by a headline I never expected to see. Entrepreneur exposed at birthday party bust. The subheading read, SEC and FBI involved in multi-state fraud investigation. Melanie's photo accompanied the article, not the polished professional headshot she used for her business profiles, but a candid shot of her looking disheveled, being escorted to her lawyer's office early that morning. I read the article twice, my fingers tracing the words as if to verify their reality. There was no joy in seeing my daughter's downfall splashed across the news, only a profound sense of relief. A 22-year-old knot in my chest had finally begun to loosen. My meeting with the SEC went exactly as Agent Reeves had described. I provided a detailed statement about how Melanie had contacted me after my lottery win, her transparent attempts to gain access to my money, and my subsequent discovery of her fraudulent history. The agents were professional, thorough, and surprisingly sympathetic. You're not the first parent who's had to make this kind of choice, one agent told me quietly as I was leaving. And you won't be the last. I flew back to Milwaukee the next day, returning to my quiet house with fresh eyes. The dust still gathered in corners, the wallpaper still peeled in the hallway. But something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just the place where I existed anymore. It was a space of clarity and possibility, not mere survival. 2 days later, on April 14th, I walked into the First Great Lakes Credit Union with a plan. I signed the papers to establish the Elaine Bennett Fund, allocating $2.6 million of my lottery winnings to create a foundation targeting working-class families dealing with medical bankruptcy. We'll focus on immediate grants for emergency treatments, housing stabilization, and educational recovery, I explained to the trust manager. I know what it's like to lose everything to medical bills. I want to help people who are where I once was. The first recipients were already selected. A child with leukemia who needed travel funds to reach Mayo Clinic. A single father of 3 whose wife had recently passed, now struggling with funeral costs. And a woman named Araceli who nearly lost her home while caring for her disabled sister. Next, I approached Northview Community Services, where Elaine had volunteered for years before her illness. They were expanding, and with my contribution, they agreed to name their new wing the Elaine Hope Resource Center. We hung her photo in the entryway, that same warm smile and soft eyes that had sustained me through decades of loneliness. I began volunteering weekly, teaching budgeting to teenagers, helping elderly residents navigate online forms, and quietly writing checks when bureaucracy moved too slowly for real human needs. On May 3rd, I received a call from Marcus Dean. We recovered 64% of the money, he told me, his voice lighter than when I'd last heard it. And Melanie, she pled guilty to avoid a federal trial, 8 to 12 years, they're saying. How's your daughter? I asked, remembering the scholarship letter and photograph. She's re-enrolled for the fall semester, he said. It's a fresh start. Andrew emailed a few days later. Thank you, Harold. You gave us closure we couldn't buy. Catherine sent a handwritten card. You taught me the difference between justice and vengeance. On May 10th, a month after the confrontation in New York, I visited Elaine's grave. The spring had fully arrived, wrapping the cemetery in tender green. I carried a folded newspaper and a single flower. She called me Daddy again, I said aloud, kneeling beside the headstone. But this time, it wasn't enough. I remembered who you taught me to be. I placed the newspaper beside her grave, the article about Melanie's arrest, and then the graduation photo from the gift box. Melanie captured in 2 moments, the beginning of her adult life and the consequences of her choices. As I walked through the cemetery, passing strangers and nodding politely, I reflected on what I'd learned. Sometimes strangers treat you like family, I thought. Sometimes family treats you like a stranger. I realized that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's walking away without dragging the weight with you. For 22 years, I'd carried the burden of Melanie's abandonment. Now I could finally set it down. Back home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching evening settle over my neighborhood. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was the young couple who'd moved in down the street last month. They looked nervous, clutching some papers. "Mr. Bennett?" the woman said hesitantly. "We heard you might be able to help us with this loan form. We're trying to adopt, and the paperwork is overwhelming." I smiled and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said. "Let's get to work." In that moment, I understood that the true value of my lottery win wasn't the money itself. It was the chance to rewrite my legacy, not with revenge, but with purpose. To become again what Elaine had always seen in me, a man who helps, a man who builds, a man who stays. And in that quiet act of neighborly kindness, I found something I'd thought was lost forever: peace.